Hi all. Blitz games on the internet rarely affect me, or they rarely get me thinking about chess, but sometimes there's remarkable exceptions. Recently I had a very fast paced game against Wesley So, where in fact he berserked me. I only had like a minute and a half, and nevertheless I really regretted the game. I had 3 minutes and I played a good strong attacking move here. I had a fantastic position here. I played rook d6 just with the idea of rook g6 mating, a marvellous position, and he defended, it seems, at the time, and I panicked. He just defended that square g6, and I started panicking here. But sometimes, as I mentioned in the past, there are weaknesses of the last move, and there's been a few videos on the channel which have kind of demonstrated that over and over again. Now the purpose of this video is a slightly different perspective on it, in that how do weaknesses of the last move arise? Well, they often arise when the opponent is under great pressure. They have to cover key defensive squares, like here g6 has to be covered, but in doing so a trade-off is made, and the whole concept of trade-offs is very interesting. You have that in all sorts of domains. There's actually a very interesting wiki article that you might want to check out just generically about trade-offs. Essentially, we have limited time and resources, and for example, you might trade off. If you do one activity, you're trading off that time that you could be doing another at a simple level. Or if you've got a number of things to put in a box, you can put a number of smaller objects or a few larger objects. There's a trade-off. Sometimes the laws of physics, trade-offs. And in chess terms, although we don't have the laws of physics, we have the law of resources cannot cover every single attacking square all the time. And especially pawns, they don't have the flexibility to move backwards. So they're actually a special case of weakness of the last move. That if you provoke pawns to move forward, you've got to check what they've just uncovered. And here the g5 square is no longer covered. So it's like an implied move to try and see, well, what can be done to exploit the g5 square here. And so it's almost an implied idea to try and exploit g5 now. It's like an exploitable clue. If you're given a puzzle position and asked to find the amazing resources in the position, it's often helpful to be given a puzzle clue. But in chess terms, if you're in an over-the-board game, the clues you want are really, you want the exploitable clues. You don't want generic clues. The exploitable clues, in terms of weakness of the last move, yes, it's exploitable because they've left that behind. What has been left behind by the opponent's last move? Okay, as I mentioned, we've talked about this in many videos on the channel, but the reason of why a weakness of the last move would be created is simply, if the opponent's resources are stretched, they're making a trade-off of covering one square. It was covering g5 with another square, g6. In the case of a pawn, that flexibility is very limited. So here, rook d5, just going back for the g5 square. And this is a very difficult position for white. It's an implied move which I didn't play, and I regretted. And I was thinking, during the night, I think about this missed opportunity. Why didn't I play this? And Wesley So himself said I had a winning position here. Of course it was winning, but it was really... Basically, it was like a ridiculously fast game anyway, so who cares? There's no big deal about it. But for me, what's interesting is how you can apply the concept of trade-offs in the chess domain. How does that link up with our concept of weakness of the last move? As I say, when you're in a good position against, doesn't matter who it is, Garry Kasparov, Wesley So, doesn't matter who it is, if you're in a good position, are they covering all the squares all the time? And I've had other examples of this recently where it's come up again. A GM opponent has covered certain squares and it seems as though the attack's over. But you've got to ask, they're doing a magic trick. There's a downside. They've left some squares behind. that is going to be the case a lot of the time. If you've got a lot of pressure, you've got a big audience for the opponent's pieces to try and please all the time, all the squares. No, they can only please some of your pieces, some of the squares. So here, g6, but it's left behind g5. That's the way to think. You've got to think, doesn't matter who the opponent is, doesn't matter even if they're a super GM, weaknesses the last moves will happen because of the concept of trade-offs. You can't cover sometimes all the squares all the time if you're in a technically difficult position. Now what happens here, let's turn on the Kimbitzer just to get the analysis right here. First of all, it should be said this wasn't the best defense. Apparently, Rook fe1, believe it or not, just vacating the king, and it's not even that clear, apparently, that this, for example, is only slightly better for black, this variation. Yeah, there's some crazy stuff going on here. So technically, there was a defense in Rook fe1. Believe it or not, the idea of Rook g6 check here, as I say, it's just a blitz game, but the principles are interesting to me. That's the purpose of this video, to say, well, to get you thinking on this particular angle. Why do weaknesses of the last move occur? You may not have thought of that before. If this video gets you thinking, why they occur, then that's the success for me. You might have heard that expression. I'm trying to make an analogy also to that expression, pleasing all the people all the time. In chess terms, is the opponent defending all the squares all the time? And I'll show you another example after this to try and reinforce this idea against the GM opponent. But let's just look at this. So it wasn't the optimal defense. Apparently it's not even decisive, but this makes it decisive because Rook d5 here, this vacation move, it doesn't work now very well. This position, we have Rook e5 check now, and this is really bad. If here Queen d5 is checkmate, I mean, obviously I'm not going to see these variations during the game, so this is kind of academic to the main concept that I wanted to say. You might think, why isn't it similar to that line, by the way? What happens here? Why the check here isn't so hot? Let's see, Rook e6 check here. There's bishop takes e6. Yeah, it's because also this check here is very useful rather than here, because we can't check there. If we can check there, then we can get this position with Queen d5 being mate. So it makes a big difference. So it wasn't technically lost, and so in a way it's showing actually White did have a defensive resource here. But I think this is the first port of call in this position. The opponent's resources are stretched. Are they pleasing all the squares all the time? No. Especially that last move, it's made by a pawn, which cannot go backwards to now defend g5. So this was the logical shot. If we follow with Queen d2, then some extra pyrotechnics. Knight takes f2 though. And this is very interesting because there's double checks. For example, here, knight takes h3, double check, and mate. But as I say, I'm trying to think about the more abstract concept here, rather than the specific positions. I'm rather trying to draw you the concept with examples. So bear with me so far, because I've been really wanting to do this video, and it's this move Queen f3 was played, and I kind of fluffed it after that. Queen f3 was a terrible mistake. It was a terrible blunder. But Rook d5. Then so Queen d2. We'll follow this again. Knight takes f2 is basically. I mean, there's basically no defense. If it takes, we can take here or even take the queen. And if king takes there, check. And we're going to take the queen soon. And this will be a winning position, although not immediately over. We have to make sure our king doesn't get mated. But as I say, it's ridiculous. Now, I'm being ridiculous in a way because this is like a throwaway bullet game from the Super GM perspective. But my next example will be from a 5-minute game against the GM of the same thing. Is the opponent basically pleasing all the squares all the time? Just think about that. I'm saying whoever you are playing, yeah, are they doing some sort of trade-off, yeah, to give the impression that they're defending squares that you've attacked and that's it? Because that's not it. You've got to have the confidence to look, what are they not covering? So bear with me for the next example. Okay, this is another example. 5 minutes each against the GM on the ICC called Kashig, just yesterday actually from the time of this video. And I had a great position. Is he covering all the squares all the time? Or is he only being able to please my pieces, some of the squares, some of the time? Queen h5, I'm cutting into the light squares. I've got a fantastic position. Surely, if he ever opens up the e file, I'm going to have things like queen g6 and this bishop's going to drop off. So he plays a move which looks as though everything's intact. It's a GM. He's got everything under control, right? He's pleasing all my pieces all the time on all the squares. Is that the case? No. There's a weakness of the last move. It's another implied basically winning move from the weakness of the very last move. A trade-off has been made. Why has a trade-off been made? Because his resources are overstretched here. Was this the only defensive try? It's a difficult position. Apparently knight takes d6, just opening up, and queen f6 covers against the queen g6 here. But this position is difficult. h4 and black might start crumbling soon. This is a difficult position to defend. Black is getting stretched, but there's some resistance. It's not end of game yet with best play from black, apparently. But anyway, in the game he plays queen g7, just covering some squares. And you've got to ask yourself, in a better position, and you may have bad results against really strong players because you're freaked out because you think they're covering everything. Get rid of that notion they're not covering everything. They're doing a magic trick on you. They're doing trade-offs. They're trading off with their moves, sometimes, control and protection of certain squares at the expense of other squares. The queen was there. What was it covering? e8. What is the implied move here? It's a crushing move. Knight e8. I'd missed this. Knight e8. And it makes me sad to keep missing opportunities like this. If bishop f7, we can take, and we're just going to be a piece up, for example. So the question is, you've got to be on the lookout, like almost immediately, to have a very strong intuitive idea of why exactly do weaknesses of the last move occur. It's the physics of the chessboard. There's limited resources to be able to defend all key squares all the time. Under great pressure, players will make a trade-off move which by implication will trade control of certain squares defensively for other squares. Be on the lookout. And please report to me any games where this is useful. So we're trying to reinvigorate again this concept we've harped on many videos on the channel, weaknesses of the last move. But why are they created? Because of the trade-off situation, the trade-off scenario. Limited resources to defend. The opponent cannot please all your pieces all the time defensively, especially if you've got a great attacking position. It's very, very difficult to do that. Here, the opponent basically cracked. He's overstretched. He's left e8 fatally alone, just with queen g7. So I'm hoping from these two examples you're picking up an enthusiasm for a concept of trade-offs, of limited resources defending squares all the time. And maybe you can use that in your own games. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.